Thank you for joining us today for our 2025 Ramsey County and City of St. Paul Black History Month Committee. This year, the Black History Month Committee is presenting Empowering Progress, African Americans in the Labor Movement, which will be a panel discussion. We'll start with our land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some had lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin with this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We are standing on the ancestral lands of the Dakota people. We want to acknowledge the Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk people who also call this place home. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the treaties made but never honored or kept with the tribal nations that entitle non-Native people to live and work on traditional Native lands. Consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. Please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events.
I'd like to give a huge thank you to our 2025 Black History Month sponsors. The Ramsey County Child and Family Services Department and of the City of St. Paul. We have the Talent and Equity Resources Equity Division, our Human Rights and Equal Opportunity, HRIO as we like to call them, right? St. Paul Public Libraries, thank you very much. Office of Financial Services, Parks and Rec, Fire and Emergency Services, thank you all so much for sponsoring this. And the Office of Technology and Communications, my department, Public Works, Department of Safety and Inspections, DSI as we like to call them, and City Council, thank you all so much for sponsoring this event.
The Association for the Study of African American Life and History. The 2025 theme is African Americans in Labor. The founding of Black History Month. When Carter G. Woodson established Negro History Week in 1926, he realized the importance of providing a theme to focus the attention on the public. The intention has never been to dictate or limit the exploration of the Black experience, but to bring the public's attention to important developments that merit emphasis. Themes reflect changes in how people of African descent in the United States have viewed themselves, the influence on social movements, on racial ideologies, and the aspirations of the Black community.
Our presenters today, participants of our panel will be our panel that's moderated by Professor William Jones. He likes to go by Will. Will is an author and professor of U.S. history at the University of Minnesota. Will, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me on the panel. As Nehemiah said, I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota. I teach Black history, American history, and labor history and the connections between them. My most recent book is called The March on Washington, Jobs, Freedom, and the Forgotten History of Civil Rights. And I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you. And then we have Elder Ann Durades. So Jean Ann is a workforce pioneer, arts advocate, and educator focused on promoting African American artists. Jean Ann, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jean Ann. Pay no attention to the introduction because I've been retired for 33 years. I'm still acquainted and associated with the workforce, and I see where things have changed and where things have not changed. And I'm very glad I'm retired. I'm from Chicago, and it was a culture shock when I moved here. I lived in Chicago, raised there, went to the University of Illinois, then the University of Wisconsin. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. And we have Elder Frank White. Frank is an author, historian, and advocate for St. Paul, Rondo, and African American baseball history. Frank, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Nehemiah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be on our panel today. I'm originally from lifelong St. Paul resident, and I've worked in recreation for about 40 years. I've been involved in sports, and eventually rebranded myself or reinvented myself as an author and a historian, and now considered an elder, which obviously means I have a couple of years under my belt. And I've retired several times, but I'm still working and actively involved in writing and research. So thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Louise Sundin is an educator, labor leader, and advocate for workers' rights, women's rights, and social justice. She's an advocate. Louise, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here today. And my background, as you said, is in education. I was a 39-year ninth grade English teacher. Both my parents were teachers. So I feel very close to the person I'm going to talk about today. I'm celebrating my 50th year in the labor movement. This year, I will be my 50th year of being a delegate to what was originally the Minneapolis Labor Union Council, City Labor Union Council. It is now the Minneapolis Regional Labor Federation. And I am also involved in 5 or 6 organizations like the Minnesota AFL-CIO State Retiree Council, an officer of that, and Minneapolis Regional Retiree Council, and about 4 or 5 other organizations of retired workers. And we don't really retire. We tire again doing what we love, which is what we're doing today.
Thank you so much.
Now we're going to circle back to Will, who is our moderator, and we'll kind of get into our panel discussion.
Okay, well, I think this is a great panel that we have here to talk about experiences in work and in labor. And I thought I would start with Mr. White. Maybe you could just talk about your own career and some of the things that helped create success for you in your career.
William, thank you very much. For me, it's hard to define success, I guess, but I started off in my career wanting to be a CPA and eventually got involved in recreation and worked there for a number of years. Sports still being involved in my life very much as a volunteer coach and administrator. And so all of my working career has really been centered around public service to people and history, a curator, and then also an author with published articles in a number of different history magazines. So it's hard for me to define success, but I love what I do. I have a great passion. So I think my success is really my passion for the things that I've been able to do in my public service career.
Thank you very much. Ms. Durades, do you want to tell us about your career and some of the things that helped create success?
Yes. I looked at that question, what created success? I'm not sure what success is. I do realize that success is different for each one of us. And I'm not sure I was successful. I know that I did a good job. I didn't always do a good job. When I started off teaching, I was not a good teacher, which is why I left that profession, which is why I think we have to be open to change and to rebranding, because we don't know where our work is going to take us and how it's going to affect our lives. I do know that I changed jobs fairly often, and each time I changed jobs, I had to rebrand myself. And I did, part of the way I did that was I went back and took graduate courses in different areas based on what I was doing and where I thought I might be next. So I was always trying to keep up and get maybe one half step ahead. I don't know that I ever did, but that's the way my life went. I wanted to be a translator and interpreter. However, I didn't know how to type. And when I started off, I avoided typing because that's what Black people were, and Black women were pushed into the secretarial field. So I ended up teaching school. And then I saw that I wasn't good at that. And then I went on to working in social service. And I saw that I was becoming part of a system that I didn't like or care for and didn't believe in. So I left there and went to the YMCA programs. One of the things I think that helps me, that maybe helps me having been able to do a good job, is that I've had good mentors. And I think it's important to either be interesting enough person to have people that want to mentor you, or you have to ask someone to mentor you and telling them that there are many things that you want to learn from them. So as long as I had mentors and as long as I knew what I thought I wanted, where I wanted to go, even though I wasn't always sure, I kept plugging at it and ended up as a consultant with the YMCA to help strengthen the YMCA organizations. So whereas I never wanted to teach, I ended up being an educator anyway. By being a consultant, I was still an educator, and that pleased me very much. So I retired after 39 years and feel very good about that. The other thing that's most important for success in my career is being able to balance work and life. It's not important just to work and have the work be your life. It's important to have a life along with your work. And I learned that from my father, who always told me that work is just a means to the end, not the end. And as a result of that, most of my friends are not in any of the professions that I've been in. So I've had a rich life before I retired and still have it. In fact, it's gotten richer.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Ms. Sundin, would you like to tell so you're going to talk about your own career and also the career of Nellie Stone Johnson, is that correct? So I'll let you decide the focus, but would you talk about some of the routes to success in a career from that perspective?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, you're right. I am going to not talk about myself today, and which you'll be glad of. But I am going to talk about Nellie Stone Johnson. Nellie Stone Johnson, for those of you who live on the other side of the river from Minneapolis, you might not have the long history that we have in Minneapolis with Nellie. But Nellie was a Minnesota-born civil rights activist and union organizer. She helped shape Minnesota politics and public policy for over 70 years. She was a powerful champion for human rights, civil rights, women's rights, and labor rights. And her lifelong mantra was a good education leads to a good job, which equals a successful life. So that mantra I've learned long ago as with her mentoring, because I had the good fortune to serve with her on the Minneapolis Central Labor Union Council, as I said, many, many years ago. Nellie was born Nellie Saunders Allen in 1905. Her parents had a dairy farm near Hinckley and were among, as you might guess, some of the very few black farmers, black farming families in Minnesota in the early 1900s. Her father, who was, I think, taught her everything she knew about organizing and about how to change life. And her father co-founded the Twin Cities Milk Producers Association. He was in the Nonpartisan League and then the Farmer Labor Party. And I always say that it isn't just this frigid weather we get from North Dakota. It's part of our Minnesota history that the Nonpartisan League and the Farmers Union and Farmer Labor Party came from that direction. Her mother was a teacher. Nellie distributed, this is an example of two strategies for organizing that I don't think our young organizers have probably thought of yet. And the first one was that her father gave her a packet full of literature, flyers for the Nonpartisan League, and put her on her horse and sent her to school in the morning because she had to go from the farm into town to go to school in Hinckley. And he instructed her to stop at all the neighboring farms on the way and give the farmers the flyers for the meetings of the Nonpartisan League. So this was back at the age of 13. She was already an organizer, and she was organizing on horseback. Now, also as a teenager, she joined the NAACP. Now, if you can imagine a teenager outside of Hinckley joining the NAACP, way far ahead of her time. When she graduated from high school in 1922, she moved to Minneapolis to attend the University of Minnesota, as many farm girls in Minnesota always did. However, University of Minnesota, of course, was not ready for Nellie, because the University of Minnesota was not very welcoming of a young teenager from who was African American. So she got involved with a radical organizer, or at the time, who was hanging around campus, and she became part of some organizing and some pretty far off the charts radical movements. But she did learn through that experience how to be a powerful public speaker, and she was a keynote of several organizational meetings. But she had to earn a living. So in 1924, she was hired as an elevator operator at the all-male, at the time, Minneapolis Athletic Club downtown, and she earned $15. Now, you know that we have spent the last decade trying to get $15 an hour as minimum wage, right? But no. Nellie earned $15 a week as an elevator operator. And after their wages were cut to $12.50 a week, that got her dander up, and she began organizing the workers in her elevator. She had them kind of trapped, if you will, in the elevator going up and down from floor to floor, and she would convince them that they needed to start a union. And her compatriot, the guy who was running the freight elevator, did the same thing. So these two organizers, the freight elevator operator and Nellie running the passenger elevator, or convinced all the workers at the athletic club to start a union. What she joined and later became president of the union that they started, which was Local 665, Hotel Restaurant Workers, which in 1936 was a precursor of what the union we have now, Local 17, Hotel Restaurant Workers Union of the Twin Cities. So that's her start in organizing. The only one I know of who used elevators and horseback for organizing.
That's great. So a model for young organizers today. Get yourself a horse and get
Yes,
yourself an elevator.
you betcha.
I think people don't remember that elevators used to have drivers. Um, so I've been asked to give sort of historical interludes in between some of these questions, and I just want to pull out a few themes that I saw in this discussion so far. I think some of you may be familiar with the historical debate between two Black leaders in the early 20th century, W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. And essentially their debate was one of how to improve your lot as a worker. W.E.B. Du Bois felt that it was critical for Black workers to have political rights, to gain and particularly to gain access to education, and that was a way forward. And I think Ms. Sundin mentioned that this was something that Nellie Stone Johnson also believed in and repeated. Booker T. Washington's position was that it wasn't so much that so important actually that you had political rights, but that Black workers needed skills and that they could make themselves valuable to the economy and improve themselves in that way. And I think, as it's great, I think this year that Black History Month is focused on the importance of organized labor. And it strikes me that that is an approach that is kind of left out of both the Du Bois approach and the Booker T. Washington approach, which is one that you can improve your position as a worker collectively with other workers by organizing with other workers. And I think Nellie Stone Johnson is a great example of a Black leader who, both valued education. She certainly valued political rights, but she also knew that workers needed to cooperate and band together in order to fight for the things that they needed. And that's something that I think we can dwell on in this Black History Month theme this year. So should we move to the next question? So we can go through in the same order so that we did before. So Mr. White, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about your own experiences in the workforce and a particular social justice issue that impacted your experience there.
Thank you. So in my own career, one of the challenges that I found was early on when I left St. Paul or the Rondo neighborhood, and I was the director at the Martin Luther King Center. I ended up going to Richfield to become the director of Park and Recreation there. And it was difficult because I was the only person of color on the entire city staff. And it was a real challenge. And in fact, I found out later on that there were workers within the system that did things to undermine my existence because they didn't really want me in that position. And I still got through that. I fought through that. I stayed. So I think over the years, I ended up being a positive ambassador for the city of Richfield, and which would relate later on as things changed, and this has impacted the entire metro area. One of the factors is as we've changed who we are, the demographics have changed in Richfield. Before I retired, a number of Latino families began to move into Richfield, and the sport that they wanted to play generally was soccer. There were other sports, but generally the males wanted to play soccer. And what it did for us is our fields were permitted. So you couldn't play on a soccer field unless you had a permit. So it made us, as well as Minneapolis, St. Paul, and if you look at all of the surrounding metro areas, it made us look at how the influx of immigrants have changed our recreational programs and facilities, which has impacted our work. It's empowered our work structure to be different, our thought process to be different, how we provide services, again, for those individuals that now live in every community, and their choice maybe isn't the traditional baseball, softball, or tennis. In fact, if you look across the board, there's a number of activities. I think Asians play a sport called kata, and they use like a volleyball net, but they actually kick the ball over the net and don't hit it. There's volleyball, and so we've had this influx again, which has made us change how we provide services. So socially, from a social standpoint, it's really made us look at providing our work structures, when we're open, how we open, facilities, programming to meet the needs of all of those individuals that now, again, live in our communities far different than maybe back in the 60s and the 70s. So there's a small take on my answer to that.
Thank you very much. Ms. Durades, do you want to take up this question about a social justice issue that impact you in the workplace?
Well, the social justice issue that I have lived with and worked with seeming like all of my life is that of equal opportunity. And one of the reasons we don't have equal opportunity is because our biases. Some are conscious and some are unconscious. Some are just white people against people of color, and some are people of color against other people of color. And it seems like we need to be able to look at that within ourselves, because until we can level the playing field, we're not going to have equal opportunity. And so I think that each of us is responsible in our own way to understand, number one, the bias in ourselves and how we move past that, or how we not allow that to affect our decision making, and to look at ways in which we can identify bias and be strategic about pointing it out, whether it's with a group or with, well, of course, you need concrete examples always, but to be paying attention to everything that we do and what other people do, so that we can help make a change, because we're either going to be part of the solution or part of the problem. And for me, it's important to be part of the solution. And so that's what I've been working at all of the time and this bias seems to be coming out. In fact, whenever I go to the doctor, a new doctor, I ask about their bias. Have they looked at it? And do they see themselves? Do they see it? And I've got some issues right now with the medical profession. But the bias is out here. And I'm working as a volunteer with restorative justice. And one of the things we always say is what we're doing is no blame, no shame, no judgment. And I have to deal with the fact, and I bring this up, I can't imagine anyone not having some sort of a judgment or opinion about someone who has done something to harm someone else. But it's how do we let that affect us in the way we treat people and the kinds of decisions we make. So bias, equal opportunity is, for me, the most important social justice issue right now as we talk about work, because we have to be able to impact our workforce differently than we are now. And we have to be able to be out there figuring out, not necessarily just by ourselves, with others, the best ways, the best strategies for moving forward, not just standing still, for moving forward, to being a part of the solution. Because right now, a lot of us, we are a part of the problem, and that can't go on. So we have to have justice, social justice within our own ranks and within any of the ranks that we are connected with.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sundin, do you want to address this question from the point of view of Nellie Stone Johnson?
Absolutely, because she's a terrific example of how she used local, state, and national politics to change policy to policies and laws to advance social justice. And she did that her entire life. In 1941, she met Hubert Humphrey, and she eventually became his civil rights advisor. And throughout his whole political career, which started in the city of Minneapolis as mayor, and then, of course, ended up as vice president of the United States, she traveled with him to Asia as his civil rights advisor, and they were always connected politically. And one of the most interesting things the two of them were a part of is that in 1944, Hubert Humphrey brought the Minnesota Democratic Party, at the time it was just the Democratic Party, to the table, and Nellie brought the Farmer Labor Party to the table, and they merged into what is now the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party. And you know that in the United States, there is only one DFL party, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, and that is the state of Minnesota. And Humphrey and Nellie Stone Johnson were at the table that made that happen. And the next year, she used her political acumen and skills to get herself elected to the Minneapolis Library Board as the first African American elected to citywide office in Minneapolis. And later she continued as a trustee of the Minneapolis Public Library System. Those of you in the St. Paul Library System may know that. And she also, one of her first actions that was so impactful was that she led the drive to create the Minneapolis Fair Employment Practices Department that was the first of its kind in the nation. And then a decade later, she led the initiative to create a statewide version of the Minneapolis Fair Employment Act. So she almost single-handedly changed state law and city policy in one fell swoop. In 1950, she authored the Minneapolis NAACP initiative that led to the desegregation of the entire United States Armed Forces. Now, if that isn't influential, I don't know what is. So it was her activity that authored the beginning of that. A decade later, in the 60s, she raised funds for the freedom marches of Martin Luther King. And then at the age of about 60, she got to be an entrepreneur. And now I know young people these days really want to be entrepreneurs, but she had you beat. She started that in 1963. She opened her own sewing and alteration shop in downtown Minneapolis. And she'd probably now be an anchor business to the hot North Loop. And she continued her business in downtown Minneapolis for over 30 years. So if you add that up, she started at age 60, and another 30 years, she was 90 before she quit that, gave up that business. In 1979, she was Van White's campaign manager in his successful bid to be the very first African-American member of the Minneapolis City Council. And for the next decade, she was our Minnesota representative on the Democratic National Committee. And in 1982, Now, these are kind of bookend of trips. In 1982, she traveled to Africa for the U.S. State Department with Vice President Mondale. So that's two trips with two U.S. vice presidents. One and she was advisors to both. Nellie's one of Nellie's nieces, Peg, said that she would go over to the sewing shop, to the alteration shop after school and hang around. And she said there was a nonstop a group of visitors who would come every day, politicians and wannabe politicians wanting to come and get Nellie's advice, get her thoughts, and get her support. So a woman of influence in politics in order to change policy and law to advance social justice.
Thank you. That's great. Just to, again, a little interlude. I think I saw sort of three main themes come out in this. One is the importance of persistence and not just accepting discrimination and bias. The importance of equal opportunity. I think we're in a moment in which many people are treating equal opportunity as if it's discrimination against white people. And I think it's important to remember that we, come out of this struggle as demanding equal opportunity for people regardless of their race, at a time when we face, I think, a really serious backlash against that principle. And then finally, the importance of building power and getting access to political power. I think all of those themes come together in the history of one particular union that I think is very important for the history of the Twin Cities and the United States, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and Maids, which was a union that was founded by men and women who worked in the railway industry in the early 20th century, and who faced intense discrimination. Most of the railway unions in the early 20th century were the most powerful unions in the United States, and they did not admit people who were not white and who were not men. And so workers on the industry who were excluded from the union worked mostly in the service jobs, either working in the stations, helping people get onto the trains, or working on the trains themselves, serving food, cleaning, providing for the passengers. And those workers got together in the 1920s and formed their own union. They said, if you're not going to let us into your union, we'll form our own union. And it became the first predominantly African-American union in the United States. And they were able to, by organizing, not just force the labor movement to recognize them. They got a charter from the American Federation of Labor, but they forced the company that they worked for, to recognize them and grant a union contract to them. They also forced the federal government to recognize them as a union. So they were, excluded from these provisions, but they persisted and demanded and eventually won acceptance into this system. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters was particularly important in St. Paul, which was a railway town, and had a very large organization in St. Paul, and in other cities across the country, became not just a union, but also a political vehicle and a political organization. It was led by A. Philip Randolph, who was known in the early 20th century as the Dean of Civil Rights. And it was A. Philip Randolph who, through the organizing a March on Washington in the 1940s during the Second World War, won what became the basis for civil rights laws that would be passed later at the federal level. So he won an executive order. We've heard a lot about executive orders these days, banning employment discrimination through the March on Washington, which was largely organized through the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and the people who were allied with it in cities across the country. They were able to start winning what became known as equal employment opportunity laws. So they passed they passed one in one of the first ones was actually passed in Minneapolis at the city level. Then the state of Minnesota passed one. It was resisted at the federal level until the 1960s, and A. Philip Randolph and other civil rights leaders organized the March on Washington in 1963, with one of their central demands being the passage of what they called a Fair Employment Practices Law. This would become part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and many experts consider this to be the most important civil rights measure passed in the 20th century, which created the Equal Opportunities the Commission. It's now known as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employment discrimination based not just on race or religion or nationality, but also based on gender. And that was a law that now I think many of us take for granted, that it's illegal to discriminate against somebody on those bases and not to hire somebody because of the color of their and the very long fight that was involved in fighting for those rights. So thanks to all three of you for those really fascinating stories about the history of work. Let's turn to the last question, and let's just mix it up a little bit and start with Ms. Sundin. Based on your knowledge of Nellie Stone Johnson's life, what would you say still needs to be done?
Well, I think so often these days of how much we could use her voice and her compelling presence. Nellie was a tall woman, and she had kind of long bony fingers, and when she poked those fingers into a legislator's lapel or a CEO's lapel or whatever, they got the message and they did what she wanted. So I think so much we could use that voice right and that compelling presence right now. But I want to also go back to her. What we need now goes back to her lifelong mantra, which was always started with a good education, which leads to a good job, which leads to successful life. But that good education she was passionate about, probably because her mom, the teacher, but she was appointed trustee of the Minnesota State University Board by Governor Rudy Perpich back in '82, and then subsequently served on the Higher Education Coordinating Board and the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities Board. And I served 12 years on the Minnesota State Colleges and University Board, trying to follow in her footsteps to influence the opportunities for students of color from union families to attend. And that's why we started the Nellie Stone Johnson Scholarship Program in 1989. And the scholarships through the scholarship dinner this spring that we'd like to invite you all to is going to be April 3rd. And the scholarships are continuing and have continued for 38 years. And those are, again, for students of color who can find somebody in their family who is a union member, and they can attend any of the Minnesota State colleges and universities. However, she was particularly, I think, partial to the technical education, and I was also in my service on that board as the technical education leading to a very good job with good benefits, with retirement. And of course, we know that not all jobs are like that. she was also awarded an honorary doctorate of letters by St. Cloud State University. But in 1997, the Minneapolis School Board named a school after her, Nellie Stone Johnson Community School in North Minneapolis. It still is Nellie Stone Johnson Community School. And it was the only school that was ever named after anybody who was still alive. And so we had a little bit of trouble with that. But she also now you will find her in two places that I hope that particularly you St. Paulites will take advantage to go and find her. One is you will find her sitting at her sewing machine in the Workers' Memorial Wall. And the Workers' Memorial Wall is on the Capitol approach. It's about 2 blocks south of the Capitol building itself. And I hope you go to see that wall. It is a fantastic, it was done by a wonderful stonemason and designed so that you'll be able to pick out labor leaders, different labor leaders like President Dave Rowe you'll see in there. And it's also the Twin Cities, and it's both sides of the river. And we have the Workers' Memorial Service is always in front of that wall every year, every spring, to memorialize the workers that were lost on the job that year. So that's one place you'll find her. And so it's kind of a little puzzle to be sure you find her because she's sitting at her sewing machine. But the second place now I'm very excited to tell you is that her full-length statue is in the Capitol, just off the rotunda of the Capitol in up the hill and in the North Portico. And it is full-length statue that started out with an 18-year quest by Representative Joe Mullery to get it passed by the legislature. And then I was the fundraiser, and we raised enough funds from the labor movement so that we had enough money for a full-length statue of Nellie. So Nellie Stone Johnson's statue, which you will notice if you have a keen eye, I hope you watch for it now, is that she has under her arm some flyers from the Farmer Labor Party. And then the other thing I hope you notice is she has her finger pointed at you. And so that was her favorite attention getting device if she was talking to you. And she was wearing clothes that she made herself. So that statue was unveiled by one of her great granddaughters. And it was also as a great picture on, if you go to the videotapes of that unveiling ceremony, Channel 11 has some on YouTube. You will see Governor Walz is kneeling, encouraging and helping the little 4-year-old granddaughter to unveil the statue, pull the veil off of the statue. And also Flanagan is, I'm sorry, I'm stuttering here, but the Lieutenant Governor Flanagan is also on her knees. But when Lieutenant Governor Flanagan made her comments about Nellie, when we unveiled the Nellie statue, she said something that has stuck with me ever since, and that is that she, as a person of color also, now when she comes into the Capitol building, she feels so much more at home and so much more that she belongs there because she knows Nellie is there and that Nellie has her back.
Thank you. The importance of memorializing this history
Yes.
of the people. Ms. Durades, do you want to talk about some work that needs to be done?
Yeah, I would like to build on to what has already been said about organizing and education and say that education is so very important. And I'm not just talking about formal education. I mean, education to life, education to how you can serve. There's all kinds of ways to be educated, to be able to accomplish and to be able to use what I consider very important is your influence to make things, to help us move toward equal opportunity. Especially women, we just don't always remember or think about how we can and how we are influencing people every day. So, as women, we need to pick up our power to be able to help things advance. And we need to do it individually, we need to do it collectively, but influencers are sometimes maybe more important than sometimes even the actual people who are elected to do something. So we're not using our influence, and we have it, and we don't believe enough in ourselves to accept the fact and move with it that we are influencers and that we have power. We have so much power to make things happen, to help things change, to organize, because we're always organizing something, whether it's a luncheon, a meeting, a group council, our families. We are the organizers, and we're not living up to what our potential is. And I think we cannot wait for anybody else, meaning the men, to do all of this. We have to do it because we have the power and we can do it. And again, if we're not going to be part of the solution, we are definitely a part of the problem. So a lot of it also depends on how we show up in this world, in our work life, our outside life. How do we show up? How do we make ourselves known? How do we make ourselves heard? How do we help others move into some very positive ways? How do we make ourselves believe that we are here doing our best and that people are looking to us and to be able to stand on our shoulders to move further? Just like I had people whose shoulders I stood on to get where I got. And I know that people are standing on my shoulders, moving in very forcefully in some very positive directions. So we have to level the playing field, eliminate bias, and make sure that we have equal opportunities for things, and that we have to educate people to understanding what that means and how we get it.
Thank you very much. Mr. White, do you want to round out this question? What work still needs to be done?
So I'm going to take a little bit different approach on this, and with all due respect to what's been said, I agree with many things. However, I would say this: we're at a point in time in where education, in many forms, is important. However, you have people doing formal education, coming out of school with degrees, they can't even find jobs. So we really need to take a look at a bigger picture in terms of, as Jean Ann just said, many different ways of education. I think the term "it takes a village." I gotta tell you, I'm so tired of hearing "it takes a village." We're at a point in time where we don't really even talk to our neighbors in communities. We're being very challenged by what's going on. Obviously, we need to respect one another. We need equal opportunity, and I get that. Although again, we're such a capitalistic driven society, I don't know when we're going to get to equal opportunity. But I understand exactly what Jean Ann is saying. I just think that we're at a point in time where we really need to respect one another. If we're going to get anything done, we've got to be able to to whether it's look across the table, look across the street, look next door. At our workplaces, we need to look at those individuals that come into the jobs. They look different. Their hair may be different. What they wear on their heads may be different. We need to respect and value everybody that, again, is involved in our communities. And now I said earlier a little bit about soccer and facilities. I'll just tell you, we are such a diverse place in Minnesota today, far different than where we've been in the past. We really need to, again, look at people, value who they are, value their intelligence. Sometimes we make fun of people that speak a different language. Well, those people are intelligent too. They're just speaking a different language. And so there's so many places that we need to improve. But the bottom line to all of it is, Jean Ann mentioned this, is respect. And we need to value people. If we're going to go anywhere, if we're going to improve who we are today in Minnesota, and we have a great state, and there are a lot of people that have built this state that are African American and people of color. And I in some of the pieces that I've done, and I think they're attached maybe to this system. There are a lot of people that, again, have built Minnesota. And I think we just need to continue to reach out to one another, respect one another, because without each other, we're not going to get there. We're at a time, obviously, Will said earlier, we're at a divisive time. And obviously, if we listen to the news every day, we know what's going on right now. There are all kinds of challenges being put in front of us that are being created to divide us. This is a time where we really need to stand up and value one another for who we are, whether it's at home, whether it's the workplace. If we're talking about empowering the workplace, every time you go into your job, you need to value those individuals that are there.
Right.
Be they man, woman, they're different skin colors, they speak different languages. You need to value them and value who you're working for, because the goal of the job is, again, to make everybody better. Individually, we're not going to get there. So to me, I think that's a part of what needs to be done.
Thank you,
Hear,
Mr.
hear.
White. Yeah, here. So I hear that we need to remember and commemorate the people who have come before us, that we need to value education that's not just formal education, but all of our ways of learning, and recognize the power and influence that we do have and use it in positive ways. And to respect the people that we work with and the people that we live with, regardless of where they come from and what their various contributions they make to the community. Try to value everyone. That Mr. White's point really resonates, I think. So I just thought I'll close out just talking about some of the history. I think many of us are familiar with the March on Washington. Largely, it's often called Dr. King's March on Washington because I think we associate it primarily with his "I Have a Dream" speech. And I've written a lot about this event, and I wanted to just take a moment to talk about the broader history that I think is really essential for understanding the importance of that march. One is, how did people get there? At the time, the March on Washington was the largest demonstration in the history of the United States. About 250,000 people participated. And it wasn't because Martin Luther King sent out a tweet saying, "Come meet me at the Lincoln Memorial." It was a process of organizing that depended upon networks that people had built over the past 20 years. I mentioned earlier that A. Philip Randolph had first called for a march on Washington in 1941, and he called it off when he demanded that the president issue an executive order. And when he called it off, he said, we need to be ready to organize another march. And he continued to hold that belief until 1963, when it was he who initiated the idea of the March on Washington in 1963. And so part of the reason that it was so successful is that people had been working over the course of those 20 years to build organizations that could actually bring 250,000 people to the nation's capital. Those organizations were civil rights organizations like the NAACP, the SCLC, CORE. They were also, some of the most important ones were organizations of Black and white women, women's clubs. The National Council of Negro Women was the largest organization of African Americans in the country at the time. It had roughly 800,000 members, and they had organizations in every city in the country that could help to build this march. The official organization that initiated the march was the Negro American Labor Council, which is an organization that most of us have never heard of. It was a relatively small organization. It was about 1,500 Black union activists in cities across the country. But what was important about them was that they weren't just union activists. Many of them were leaders of their own local union, but many of them were really important leaders in their community. They were often deacons at their churches. They were often presidents of their local NAACP branches or their core branches. So they had tremendous influence. And it was these people who fanned out, and they started to charter buses and trains. And in a few cases, even some people coming from California chartered airplanes. And because they were heads of unions, they had resources available, so they could put the money down to pay for these vehicles, to rent the vehicles. And then they went out and they sold tickets for the vehicles in their communities. And so they said to their union members and the members of their churches and civil rights organizations, go and sell these tickets. And they would sell tickets on the bus, and that way they got the money back from people who were participating in the March on Washington. But they were able to bring hundreds of thousands of people to the nation's capital because they were very well organized, and they were members of organizations that had been built up over the previous decades. And I think that is the central lesson that I take from that event, that it's not, you don't just call for a march, but you organize a march over a very long time. And I think if we want to take power in our community, and we want to improve our own lives and the lives of people that we work with and that we live with, and respect those people, we need to organize ourselves, and we need to be part of unions and community organizations that can mobilize people and build the power that Ms. Durades was talking about. So thank you very much. I'm a professor. I like to lecture, but I'm going to stop that. And I think we have time for questions, if people have questions for any of the panelists.
So I'll just highlight, I think there were just a few questions that were asked. Let's see here. So I have one question, it looks like, or it looks like maybe you, Luis, from Jerica Gomez. As a Black woman, organizing was dangerous. Did Nellie ever have issues with the law?
Oh, thank you for the question. Well, she also had a lot of very influential political friends. So if she did, there were people who could defend her and get her out of trouble. But she and she always did say that it was not often not a safe thing to do, but she had such, because of her compelling presence, and because of her stature, and because of who her friends were, I think throughout her career she was mostly safe.
Good stuff. Thank you for that, Luis. We do have another question here. Well, it looks like maybe Margaret had answered some of that as well in our chat. I'll just share the statement here. Nellie had many death threats throughout her life. She ignored them and kept it moving. A cross was burned on their property in Pine County, but her entire family was decent and respectful to others. Therefore, they had many friends in township. The neighbors band together and protected the Allen family.
That's
cool.
That's her niece that responded. So thank you for that.
Right, that is so awesome. There's another question here. Someone wants to know what someone can do if they never have been engaged in labor organizing. What's a good first step?
Ms. Sundin, do you want to
Well,
take that question?
It's probably too easy to say go to meetings and get involved, but and then to volunteer for things. And when you volunteer a lot. There are a lot of volunteer activities right now. There are days on the Hill in St. Paul. All the unions have their day on the Hill. There are always openings to run for executive board, to run for office out on. We're looking even for somebody to run for political office over on our side of the river right at the moment. So it probably sounds too simplistic, but get involved at whatever level you are comfortable with to start with. And the more you get involved, the more skills you develop, the more if you find, as was spoken about, if you find a good mentor, all the better. And somebody who will help you move into a leadership role.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Luis. And I know for some of us here who are employees, whether you're with the city of St. Paul or Ramsey County, we have unions. So definitely reach out to your union stewards or those who represent you and just get involved, because I know there's nothing better than working together for the causes that we all care about. And it only takes one small step, just showing up. You don't have to be super active, but just being there is a lot.
I just put 2 links in the chat that I mean, I think I would reiterate that if you the first thing you should do is find out if there's a union in your workplace and get in touch with it, with the people who are involved, and get active in it. Most people do not have unions in their workplaces, so it often takes a little bit of looking around. And I put the Minnesota Federation of Labor in the chat. That's a good place to contact them and ask them about opportunities to work with a union. There's also an organization called the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, which is a group of mostly young workers who have been trying to build unions where there are no unions. And I put that in the chat, and they would be happy to talk to people about how to form a union.
For sure. And if any other connections are needed and you work for Ramsey County or City of St. Paul, you can definitely reach out to me and I'll get you connected to whomever you can within your bargaining unit if you're union. And then we do have another question here. It looks like Philson Ibrahim sent a question. How are you feeling about the rights of workers in Minnesota, national and international, especially Black BIPOC workers? And that's not directed at anyone, so feel free to answer if there's multiple responses.
Does anybody want to take that?
Well, everyone is under attack now, particularly today's newspaper on our side of the river says, the headline says, slew of Minnesota companies beyond Target go mute on DEI. You know, DEI is now the target, excuse me, of Target and the target of almost everybody. And we're, you know, in one way or another, DEI involves us all in our families. And so that kind of all out attack is, we can be glad we're in Minnesota, where we have state law and where we have state organizations that are helpful, and people are already coming here for safety and coming here to be a part of communities where they feel safe. But we're all going to have to work extra hard at, you know, what am I going to do if they come for my next door neighbor, because that's what has it may come to.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the question asked about nationally, and nationally, we're seeing a pretty vicious assault on the rights of workers. Frank mentioned the importance of immigrant workers in our communities and the work they do, and if their rights are under really vicious assault.
Yep.
There's been an attack on the federal apparatus for enforcing labor rights, the National Labor Relations Board. The leadership has been fired, and they are essentially paralyzed. And as Ms. Sundin mentioned, I think we have a lot of protection in Minnesota that people don't have in other states. And I think particularly if you work in the public sector, the public sector laws protecting worker rights are fairly robust in Minnesota. And I think it's important that people know what they are and take advantage of them and use them to protect their jobs and their coworkers. And we still do have the right to form a union regardless of where we work, and people, I think, need to really take advantage of that now, because it's not clear that those rights are going to stay with us.
And
forever.
Professor Jones, I think one other attack that's particularly hateful now is the attack on and defunding and firing of everybody in USAID, because that division of our federal government is the one that is humanitarian aid, not just in this country, but throughout the world. And because of that attack on USAID and the lockout of the workers, there's, you know, truckloads full of food that's now rotting because it can't get to the little, you know, starving children in countries. And the workers have either been fired or are fearful of it. So Kennedy, I said that it is the one thing that makes us that humanitarian aid is what makes us so special, and we need to. That's the one that really gets to me when I think about it.
Yeah, and and particularly for an agricultural state like Minnesota, I think we have to remember that aid is purchased from American farmers, and
Yep.
farmers are now finding themselves with contracts that they thought they were going to provide from the federal government that they're not able to sell their crops, and so it really has a negative impact on our international situation, but it also really touches us at home. Also to mention the people who are employed by the federal government, many of whom are in Minnesota, who are now finding their jobs at threat.
Here's the exact quote from, I'm sorry, just from JFK. American humanitarian aid was our political obligation as the single largest counter to the adversaries of freedom. Powerful statement.
So one of the questions about in the chat is about the Stark's barbershop. Mr. White, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, a bit of it. I know we're going to have an open conversation about that on the 20th at Hallie Brown. So if really people wanted more detail, we'd surely like them to join us. But the Stark's Barbershop, the one that probably created the most controversy, or let me go backwards here. So this gentleman was really an entrepreneur. He had barbershops downtown. He had them on Western and Selby, and then on Grand Avenue where McAllister College is now, and then eventually moved to one to St. Clair and Cleveland, and that was the one that became more of a controversy because the neighborhood there, the Ku Klux Klan got involved. And after a couple years, I mean, they continued to make it very difficult for him even to build the place. But after he built it, after a couple years, there was actually a shot fired through the window, and eventually he would leave. But it became a situation where the Ku Klux Klan was involved. But more than that, I think it was the neighborhood not really accepting him because of bias. And we'll go back to what Gene was said, or maybe all of us are saying, it was a difficult time. But I think the piece for me that continues to stick out is when we talk about individuals that help grow St. Paul. Here was a gentleman that was an entrepreneur. We might have looked at him as just a barbershop entrepreneur, but that was a part of success. And he continued to move. His place on Western and Selby was right across from the big hotel that was there. Back in those days, the clientele for black barbers was white people. It wasn't black people. And so again, he was maybe an entrepreneur ahead of his time, that we all again as people transition to the Rondo neighborhood. Sometimes we forget about the Turner Starks and those individuals that created businesses successfully in downtown St. Paul. So Turner Starks is one of those people for me that stands out. A friend of mine now, Mike Corey, is a guy that's really put together that and has worked again with the Mann family, who are relatives of Turner Starks, and has put together a great piece of history about him and the family. So, and for me, the connection goes back to earlier St. Paul, and then developed as people transitioned to Rondo. So
Thank you.
We put that link in the chat too, so folks can sign up for that speaker series that you'll be part of for the Starks Barbershop.
I didn't hear that.
Oh, I was just stating we put the link in the chat for folks to be part of, to go to the event. That'll be on the 20th for Starks Barbershop at Hallie Brown.
And it's free.
I also want to say that right now we're talking about adults, but as adults and leaders, we are the ones that are responsible for creating future leaders. And if we're not sharing these historical facts and figures and teaching our young people, children from the time they're 2 or 3, some of the issues and how the kinds of stand-up people they need to grow up to be, then we are, for me, we're failing, because the younger ones are the ones that are going to have to hold us up. And they don't know anything about what has happened in the world to anybody. because they're not getting it in school. And we do not have organizations or small groups or churches and whatnot who are holding sessions to teach children their history, like they're doing now in Florida. They have Saturday schools because they have taken the African American history out. They have Saturday schools just to teach young people about African American history. And we think that because we are here, that that's not needed here. But if you talk to a lot of our young people, they don't know any of this. So where is our commitment to influencing, to foster growth and more inclusive education? It starts with us because we're here and we have the influence and the power and the knowledge to make it happen.
Jean Ann, I think to add in on that, I some of the work, and I know others that have been providing resources to teachers. Kids aren't being taught some of those things because teachers don't know that history either, because in their education time, they weren't taught that history.
They weren't
so
taught.
Again, we really need to help inform teachers of our history so that they can also pass it on, as well as doing some, as you said, doing some additional pieces of sharing our history. I feel bad because I think we're failing in our history. I think we're losing our history, and I think that's unfortunate. And we don't have time to really talk about all of that. But I agree with you. We need to provide that history of who people are, and whose shoulders we've stood on, and whose shoulders young people need to stand on in the future. But we need to really, as you said, help. And part of that, for a while, I was frustrated with teachers. But then when I thought more about it, teachers don't know that history either. That's because true. They didn't learn it when they went to school because it wasn't provided then. So
yeah, I agree.
Right, and I just wanted to share a few more bits of information in the chat. A lot of us know Elder Mahmoud Al-Qadi. He does a speaker series, the New School for African Thought, every fourth Friday. And that's something where I love to attend. I see a lot of youth attending there too, where they can go and get some of that history from someone who's been teaching it for a long time. The other organization I wanted to highlight who's been part of our African American Black History Month events is NIDCAD, the Network for the Development of Children of African Descent. That is an African American organization that takes a multi-generational approach, whether it's for the elders, whether it's for the youth, our parents, the schools. They work with the school systems. We tutor through the libraries. I get to advocate and assist in tutoring in that organization, but it takes an approach that teaches you your history and instills that value within our youth so that they know who they are. So regardless of what someone can tell you, you know the power that you hold, and you're looking at life in through a different lens. So those are just a few tidbits we put in the chat. And then I also wanted to make sure that we highlight and thank you for joining us and celebrating. We're coming close on time here. So we want to thank you for joining us this Black History Month. And I always forget to introduce myself and some of our members in our committee, but it takes a lot of us to do this. So I don't like to introduce myself, but my name is Marvelyn Tripp, and I'm part of the Black History Month committee. One of our committee members is Ashley O'Brien, who has been astronomical at helping us put our events together this year. So I want to make sure that we highlight some of our events that are coming. If you want to check out more Empowering Progress events this month, there's some QR codes that you can check out. Just scan them and get more information on some of the events we'll have this month. There is the Celebrate Black History Month at Arlington Hills Library. So we have two events on the 20th, one with the speaker series that's also with the city of St. Paul, which Frank White and the Starks Barbershop will be part of that. And we also have the Arlington Hills Library where we'll have kind of some events and things going on. All of this is free to the public. There's some QR codes for you to sign up, get registered. And then For our final event this month, we'll be having a Empowering Progress African Americans in Labor career fair. So you will be able to get headshots, you'll be able to get resume help. Here's a QR code so you can check that event out as well. This last page kind of lists some of the things that will be happening on the 27th. With the Black Business Expo and Financial Empowerment Lunch and Learn, our career fair, and our future workforce youth discussion. And we have quite a few folks from the city of St. Paul and Ramsey County who have been, again, instrumental in putting this together. All of our events are free. We'll have some refreshments and things at our final events and really any of the events that we provide, but we want to just thank you. Thank you for all of our sponsors and all of you for taking your time and just sharing knowledge with us and being part of this Black History Month. We know that it's under attack, right? Whether it's our unions, whether it's how we show up, whether we highlight the challenges that we face and try to find solutions together. Because Elder Durades, I agree with you 1,000%. If you're not part of the solution, I say you are the problem, right? So
yes, yes, and maybe St. Paul is a part of the problem because I don't know how they've involved Minneapolis. Because here we have these two cities right across the river from each other. You're doing this. What is Minneapolis doing? Who knows about it? And what is it going to take for the two cities to come together in more ways than they are now? Right. That will empower us to move forward and help level the playing field.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I have nothing to say there, but I know it starts at one step and we can start now.
Yes. You're getting off to a good start. At what point do you involve other communities, though?
For sure.
So you've got Richfield, you've got Minnetonka, you've got all of these areas where there are people of color, there are women who we need to really get more involved. Absolutely. And men too. I won't leave them out.
Absolutely. Well, I know there was one last question in the chat that was kind of talking, and we're done with time, but they were kind of talking about some things that you can do if you're not part of, some of our labor unions and things like that. One of the things I do is, like we've all echoed over and over again, is get involved. I know the Poor People's Campaign, I'm part of that. That's something that Martin Luther King and our elders, our ancestors started, where you can work for, workers' rights and all of the health, housing, like everything that you can think of. So really just look it up. Google is an amazing tool for you to look at things that you can get involved in your community, and just, it takes one step, just show up. For sure.
Yeah. This is a great beginning, and you started it last year. Well, I don't know when you started this. I just suggest that you look at your long-range plan on how you're going to involve the next level of people. Yeah.
Another thing that maybe I could suggest is, which would be Hands Across the River. If you'd like to come over on Lake Street for some really good Hispanic and food, all those really good restaurants on Lake Street are not full these days because people are afraid. And so you could do some service to make sure that those businesses, Hispanic-owned businesses, don't go out of business because of the loss of people, going to have that great food. So come on over. And also, if you'd like to contribute to the Nellie Stone Johnson Scholarship Fund for graduates of color, you can go to Give Minnesota. We're on Give Minnesota.
Good stuff. And there's actually a link in the chat too to look at the upcoming dinner and things, and just get more information on the Nellie Stone Scholarship. I think it's awesome. If you're part of the union, you kind of get some different perks and things too. So it's awesome. Well, I again want to just thank everyone for being part of this conversation, taking your time and investing in rich history and things that we can share out to our employees and our community, to really highlight the things that need to be heard. So I cannot thank you all enough for taking your time and blessing us today with your presence and your knowledge.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was a quite a pleasure and an honor to be included and to be able to share some of my thoughts and ideas.
For sure.
Amen.
For
Yeah,
sure.
Thank you.
Stay in touch and make sure you join us for some of our other events that'll be happening later this month.
I will.
Thanks.